Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
Luckily, that one only lasted a month, and even now I'm grateful it ended when it did, because it showed me very early what control can look like when it's dressed up as values and respect. We were in high school. It was supposed to be simple, sweet, a short little relationship where you get to know someone and maybe hold hands in the hallway and text too much after school. Nothing about it should have carried weight like forever promises or ownership. We had been dating for 1 month. A month. That's barely enough time to learn someone's middle name and favorite food, let alone start acting like you get to make rules about their body, their future, and how the world will judge them. I was in a musical, and my role required me to kiss a man on stage. It was part of the show, part of the script, part of the job I had signed up for as a performer. It wasn't me sneaking around. It wasn't me being unfaithful. It wasn't even a real romantic moment. It was choreography, blocking, storytelling, and the kind of acting students do all the time in theater. It was something I was proud of, because being in a musical takes guts. You have to memorize lines, learn music, be on stage under bright lights, and act in front of a crowd. It's vulnerable and exciting, and if you're doing it at that age, it can be one of the first times you feel confident in your own skin. But when I told him about the kiss, his reaction wasn't support or even basic understanding. He went straight to control. He said he forbade me to do so. That word alone is ridiculous, and it tells you everything. Forbade, like he was my parent, like he was my boss, like he had authority over me, like I was something he could command, like my body and my choices were his to regulate. We were teenagers. We'd been together for a month, and he spoke to me like he owned me. Then he escalated it even more by dragging marriage into it. He said that once we were married, people would look back on this moment and feel how shameful I was, how I disrespected us. That part was almost surreal. It wasn't just controlling, it was also wildly dramatic and manipulative. He was trying to make me feel guilty about something normal and professional by tying it to a future that didn't even exist. He was trying to use an imaginary marriage as a leash, like, don't do this now, because one day you'll be my wife, and everyone will judge you and you'll have embarrassed us after 1 month. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about loyalty. It was about him wanting to control my choices and wrap that control in the language of honor and shame so I'd submit. It was him trying to make me responsible for his feelings and his imagined reputation. It was him taking something that should have been exciting for me, being in a musical, and trying to turn it into a moral failure. And I remember how quickly my brain went, absolutely not. Sometimes you don't need time to think. Sometimes your instincts are clear as day. The moment someone tries to forbid you from doing something harmless and important to you, especially something connected to your education, your passion, your confidence, you see exactly who they are. You see where it's headed. If he's acting like this after a month, how would he act after a year? If he's already using marriage and shame to control you in high school, what would he do later when he had more emotional power? It would only get worse. It would only get more entitled. So I broke up with him fast, not slowly. not with endless discussion. Just done, and honestly, good for me, because that was a clean, smart decision. That was me choosing myself, my goals, my confidence, and my freedom before I got tangled up in someone else's controlling fantasy. But it didn't end there, because he didn't just accept being broken up with. He and his mom came to see me in the play. And instead of being supportive like normal people, instead of just watching the show and keeping their feelings to themselves, they both tried to make me feel bad. They tried to guilt trip me for ending the relationship. They framed it like I had thrown away a marriage for a musical. Again, we were in high school. We had been dating for 1 month. The idea that a marriage had been thrown away was beyond absurd. It wasn't romantic. It was controlling, and the fact that his mother was involved in it made it even creepier, because it showed you this wasn't just a teenage boy being immature. This was a learned mindset. This was something reinforced. This was a family dynamic where a boy could speak about forbidding a girl from doing her role in a school musical, and his mother would show up to help him shame her for not complying. That kind of thing can shake you if you let it. Because when two people are standing there acting like you're immoral, you can feel the pressure to explain yourself or defend yourself. You can feel your face get hot. You can feel that old teenage fear of being judged. And they were clearly hoping for that. They wanted me to feel embarrassed. They wanted me to feel like I was wrong. They wanted me to feel like I had made some huge mistake by not accepting his rules. But I didn't give them what they wanted. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I didn't stand there trying to convince them that a month-long high school relationship is not a marriage contract. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. I just said, "Thanks for coming," laughed, and walked away. That response is honestly perfect. It's calm and polite on the surface, but it also communicates something stronger underneath. You don't get to control me, and you don't get to rewrite this into some dramatic moral story where you're the victim. It shows you weren't scared. It shows you weren't ashamed. It shows you refused to accept the frame they were trying to force onto you. And that's the part that stands out to me the most. The way you handled it. Because it takes confidence to do that, especially in high school, especially right before or after a performance, when emotions are already high. A lot of people would have gotten flustered. A lot of people would have started arguing or trying to prove they were a good person. But you didn't. You treated it like the nonsense it was. You gave them a polite line and then removed yourself. You didn't let their shame script stick to you. Looking back, it's almost funny in a dark way, because the whole thing is so exaggerated, it borders on ridiculous. A teenage boy forbidding you from doing your part in a musical, calling it shameful, and then bringing his mother into it to scold you for not choosing an imaginary marriage over a school production. But it's also not funny, because that's exactly how controlling behavior often starts. It starts with small rules. It starts with trying to control what you do and who you interact with. It starts with using shame as a weapon. It starts with talking about reputation and respect and what people will think. It starts with someone treating your body and your choices as if they belong to them. The fact that you walked away quickly is the best possible ending, because you didn't just dodge a bad boyfriend. You dodged a whole mindset that could have grown into something much more damaging if you'd stayed. You saw the red flag and you didn't negotiate with it. You didn't romanticize it. You didn't try to fix it. You didn't let guilt confuse you. You left, and you kept doing your musical. You did the kiss as part of the role. You stood on that stage and did what you were supposed to do. And you didn't allow some month-long relationship and his mother's guilt trip to steal your confidence or your joy. That's honestly the kind of choice that saves people years later. Because some people stay in that dynamic and spend years shrinking, giving up opportunities, changing their behavior, and carrying shame that doesn't belong to them. You didn't do that. You recognized the control and refused it immediately. If anything, that story is proof that even when you were young, you had a strong core. You knew the difference between love and ownership. You knew the difference between respect and control. You knew that your future wasn't something a boyfriend of 1 month could claim. And you knew that your passion and your choices were worth protecting. And the way you handled their little, you threw away a marriage. Speech says it all. You didn't throw away anything real. You threw away a threat disguised as a relationship. You threw away someone who wanted to dictate your life. Then you laughed, said thanks, and walked away like you had somewhere better to be. Because you did. The biggest moment of realization didn't come during a screaming match or some dramatic breakup scene. It happened during a normal evening out, the kind of night that's supposed to feel easy. We were sitting there talking about this and that, nothing heavy, just the usual back and forth about life and random topics, and I was doing what I always did with him. I listened. I nodded. I asked questions. I tried to be attentive and present. I gave him space to speak, and I showed interest. Because that's what you do when you care about someone. You try to make the conversation feel mutual. You try to make them feel heard. And he took that space without hesitation. He went on and on about a topic, rambling for what felt like forever, probably 20 minutes straight. I remember thinking, okay, he's really into this. Fine, I let him have it. I didn't rush him. I didn't interrupt. I didn't roll my eyes or check my phone or act bored. I stayed with him in the conversation because I thought that's what being a partner is. You listen even when it's not your favorite subject because you want the other person to feel like what they say matters. And then when he finally paused, when there was finally room for me to speak, I tried to share my thoughts, not to steal the spotlight from him, not to argue, not to correct him, just to join in. He had been talking about something for so long that I actually had a few things to say. I had my own view. I had my own experience. I had questions and ideas and little connections I wanted to add. The kind of thing that makes a conversation feel like two people building something together instead of one person performing. I started my sentence and I didn't even get to finish it. He cut me off mid-sentence and changed topics. It was fast and casual, like swatting a fly away without thinking. Like my voice had briefly floated into the space and he simply pushed it aside so he could move on to whatever was in his head next. He didn't even pause to realize what he'd done. He didn't say, "Sorry, go on." He didn't circle back. He didn't show any curiosity about what I was about to say. He just pivoted. Like my contribution was irrelevant, and the conversation only existed for him to talk, not for him to hear. If you took that one moment out of context and showed it to someone, they might say it was a minor offense. People interrupt each other sometimes. People get distracted. People get excited and jump to a new topic. But what made that moment hit me so hard was the exact situation, the imbalance of it, and the way it felt like something I had been sensing for a long time suddenly became undeniable, because I hadn't been interrupting him. I had been listening. I had been giving him attention and patience and space. He had been allowed to ramble for 20 full minutes. And the instant I tried to step into the conversation, he shut me down without even noticing. That was when it clicked. Not in a dramatic way where I stood up and stormed out, but in a quiet, painful way that settled in my chest and stayed there. He wasn't one bit interested in what I had to say. He didn't want a partner with thoughts. He wanted an audience. He wanted someone to look at him, react to him, ask him questions, and make him feel interesting. He wanted the feeling of being heard without doing the work of hearing someone else, and once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. It explained so much. It explained why so many conversations with him left me feeling strangely empty, even if we had talked for hours. Explained why I often felt like I had been with him, but not truly met by him. It explained why I sometimes went home from time together and couldn't even remember what I'd shared about myself, because so often I didn't really get the chance. I realized that I had been giving him the kind of attention I wanted back. I had been showing him interest in the way I wished someone would show interest in me. I had been trying to build closeness through conversation, but he wasn't interested in closeness. He was interested in being the center. And that's a hard thing to admit when you've been with someone for a while, because you want to believe they care. You want to believe you're being too sensitive. You want to believe it's just a bad night. But in that moment, it felt like a truth I had been dodging. I had been telling myself stories to make it okay, and suddenly I didn't have the energy to do that anymore. After that, I started noticing it more. The little ways he'd steer things back to himself. The way he'd lose interest when I talked about my day unless it somehow connected to his. The way he'd half listen, then jump in with his own story without acknowledging mine. The way he'd respond to something I said with something that sounded like a response, but didn't really match what I'd said. Like he was waiting for his turn to speak instead of actually absorbing me. It wasn't that he never let me talk at all, but it felt like my words were tolerated rather than valued. Like he was doing me a favor by listening, instead of wanting to understand me because he cared. And the thing is, you can survive that for a while if the person is affectionate. That's what made it confusing for me. And that's why I stayed with him for far too long. Because he wasn't cold all the time. He would usually be very physically affectionate. He would touch my hand, put his arm around me, kiss my forehead, hold me close. On the surface, it looked like love. It felt like love in the moment. Physical affection can make you feel chosen, especially if you're craving reassurance. It can make you think, okay, maybe I'm overthinking the conversation stuff. Maybe he's just not a talker. Maybe he shows love differently. Maybe I'm expecting too much. But that physical affection was paired with something that quietly chipped away at me. He routinely called any interests I had that he didn't share childish or stupid. Not gently teasing once in a while, not playfully joking with warmth, but consistently dismissing the things I liked as less than his. Anything I was excited about that wasn't part of his world got labeled as silly. If I was into a hobby, a show, a kind of music, a topic I loved, he'd make that face or say that line that made me feel like I should be embarrassed for caring. Like I was immature for enjoying something. Like my curiosity was something he had to tolerate rather than something he respected. And the worst part was how casual it could be. Like he thought his judgment was objective truth. Like he was the one who decided what mattered and what didn't. Over time, that kind of thing makes you start hiding your interests. You stop bringing things up because you don't want to be mocked. You stop sharing enthusiasm because it gets met with eye rolls. You start shrinking your joy to avoid being made to feel dumb. And that's such a quiet tragedy because your interests aren't just random details. They are part of who you are. They are how you relax, how you feel alive, how you connect to the world. When someone repeatedly calls those things childish or stupid, they're not just insulting a hobby. They're telling you in a subtle but constant way that you are lesser when you're fully yourself. So I was in this relationship where he could be physically warm and still emotionally dismissive. He could hold me close and still make me feel like my mind and personality weren't worth engaging with. He could act affectionate and still speak to me like my thoughts were interruptions, like my interests were stupid, like my contributions were optional. That mix is what keeps people stuck. Because you cling to the affectionate moments and you tell yourself they mean something deeper, and you try to ignore the small cuts because they don't look like real abuse. They don't look like something you can easily explain to other people, but those small cuts add up. They change how you see yourself. They change how safe you feel speaking. They change what you share. They change the shape of your inner life. And that night out, that moment of being cut off mid-sentence after listening to him ramble for 20 minutes was the clearest picture of the whole dynamic. It showed me plain as day that he didn't want to know what I thought. He wanted me to be there while he talked. He wanted the benefits of having someone beside him without the responsibility of caring about her inner world. And once you realize that, it hurts in a clean, sharp way. Not confusing like before. Not cloudy, just painful and clear. Because it makes you look back on all the times you tried to connect and got nothing back. All the times you tried to share something and got dismissed. All the times you felt lonely even while you were with him. It makes you see that you were trying to build a relationship with someone who didn't really want a relationship as equals. He wanted comfort, attention, affection, and an audience. He didn't want to be curious about you in the way that real love requires. I stayed with him far too long, and that's something I still feel annoyed about sometimes. But I also understand why it happened. When you're in it, you normalize things. You tell yourself it's not that bad. You tell yourself everybody interrupts sometimes. You tell yourself he's just blunt. You tell yourself you're being too sensitive. You tell yourself you should be grateful that he's affectionate. You tell yourself love is complicated, and slowly, without meaning to, you accept less and less. But now, when I think about that night, I don't see it as minor. I see it as the moment the fog lifted. The moment I stopped making excuses and finally let myself believe what I had been feeling for a long time. That I wasn't being met. That I wasn't being heard. That my thoughts and interests weren't valued. That I was loved in a shallow, convenient way, not in a deep, respectful way. Because the truth is, someone who truly loves you is interested in you. They don't just enjoy your presence. They're curious about your mind. They want to hear what you think. They make space for your voice. They don't treat your interests like a joke. They don't mock the things that make you, you. They might not share every hobby or taste, but they respect it because it matters to you. They listen even when it's not their favorite topic, the same way you listen to him. They don't cut you off and change topics like your background noise. And once you've felt what it's like to be treated like background noise, you never forget it. It leaves a mark, not because it's loud, but because it's quietly dehumanizing. It tells you you're there to serve a function, not to be known. That realization hurt, but it also gave me my clarity back. It gave me permission to stop trying so hard to be interesting to someone who wasn't interested. It gave me permission to stop shrinking my joy to fit his approval. It gave me permission to admit that affection without respect isn't enough. And it reminded me that a relationship isn't supposed to feel like you're sitting beside someone who only wants to hear himself talk. A relationship is supposed to feel like you exist as a full person with a voice that's welcomed, not cut off. The guy I honestly thought I was going to marry used to talk about it all the time when he was drunk. And because I loved him and wanted to believe him, I did. I took those moments seriously. I let myself picture a future with him, not just as a vague idea, but as something real. I thought we were building towards something solid. That's what made everything that happened on that trip feel so unreal and so brutal. Because it wasn't just a breakup. It was the sudden collapse of a future I thought was already forming. We were traveling from Australia to the UK for a holiday, and I paid for him to go. Even writing that still makes me wince a little, because it shows how much I was investing, how much I was trying to make things work and create good memories, how much I was willing to do for us. At the time, it didn't even feel like a huge sacrifice, because I told myself this is what partners do. You support each other. You build experiences together. You show up. If you love someone and you're planning a life with them, you don't keep score over every dollar or every effort. You just do it because you think it's going somewhere. But from early on in the trip, something felt off. He was distant, not in a quiet, tired way, but in this cold, removed way that made me feel like I was traveling beside someone who didn't want to be beside me. He ignored me a lot. He wasn't present. He didn't seem excited to be there with me. And I kept trying to make sense of it. Because when you've put time and money and hope into something, your brain tries to protect you. You tell yourself, he's jet-lagged, he's stressed, he's distracted. Maybe it's the change of routine. Maybe he's just not great at traveling. Maybe he'll settle in. Maybe it'll get better once we've been here a few days. But that's the thing about being with someone who is emotionally pulling away. You can feel it even when you're trying not to. You can feel it in how they respond to your voice, in how often they look at their phone, in how their body turns away from you, in how conversations start to feel like you're talking into empty space. The silence becomes loud. Every little moment where they could have reached for you and didn't, stacking up in your chest. Still, I tried to keep going. I tried to enjoy London. I tried to make the trip what it was supposed to be. I tried not to let the sadness swallow everything. I told myself we were on a holiday. I should be happy. I should focus on the city, the sights, the new places. But when the person you love is acting like you're an inconvenience, it's hard to feel excited about anything. It's hard to take a photo and smile and pretend you're okay when you can feel your stomach nodding every time you glance at them and they look bored, irritated, or just somewhere else entirely. The plan was that he would fly back 2 weeks earlier than me. That part was already arranged. We knew it was coming, and weirdly, I think I'd been clinging to that date, not because I wanted him to leave, but because I thought maybe after that, I could breathe. Maybe I could enjoy the rest of the trip without feeling like I was constantly being quietly rejected. Maybe I could just get through this part and then have my own space. Or maybe, in the back of my mind, I was also thinking once he's home, we'll talk properly, we'll reset, we'll get back to normal. But an hour before he left, he dropped the bomb. He told me he didn't love me anymore. An hour before, in the final stretch, with my bag still in the room, with my heart still thinking we were a team, with me still standing there in a different country where everything already felt unfamiliar. There's something uniquely cruel about timing like that. It's like he waited until the last possible moment, when there was no time to talk, no time to process, no time to even feel steady on your feet, just shock, and then goodbye. I remember the feeling of my mind going blank. like my brain couldn't hold the words. Like they floated in the air and didn't make sense. It's almost embarrassing how your body reacts in moments like that, how you can feel your blood run cold, how you can feel your hands go numb, how you can feel your throat tighten like you're going to choke on your own breath. 1 hour earlier, you're still trying to convince yourself everything will be okay, and suddenly someone is telling you the relationship is over. The person you thought you would marry is saying he doesn't love you, just like that. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he had the nerve to behave like this, didn't have real consequences. Like this was something we could just smoothly transition out of without discomfort. He expected that he'd still be living in my house after that, just as friends. Like he could say something that devastating and then still come back and exist in my life and my home as if it was nothing. Like I would just rearrange my emotions and my boundaries on command. Like I was supposed to make it easy for him. That part still makes me angry when I think about it, because it shows a level of entitlement that is almost unreal. Not only did he take the trip that I paid for, not only did he spend the holiday being distant and ignoring me, but then he ended the relationship in the most destabilizing way possible, and still assumed he'd have access to my home, my comfort, my space. Like I was supposed to protect him from the consequences of his own decision. I was still in shock, but even through the shock, something practical and strong kicked in. I asked him to pack up his stuff and be gone by the time I got back, which was 2 weeks later. I don't even know where that steadiness came from, because emotionally I felt like I'd been slammed into the ground. But I knew one thing clearly. I was not going to come home from this nightmare and find him sitting comfortably in my house like nothing happened. I was not going to make a friend's arrangement with someone who just shattered me. So he left. And after he left, reality hit. I was in a hotel in London on my own, and it felt like the world went quiet in the worst way. When you're in a breakup situation at home, at least you have familiar walls, you have your bed, your kitchen, your routine, your people, your comfort items, your safe places. Even if you're devastated in your own space. But in a hotel room in a foreign city, everything feels temporary and cold. The room doesn't belong to you. The bed smells like detergent and strangers. The walls don't know you. You don't have your normal support system. You don't have your own stuff. You don't even have the ability to do small, soothing things that usually help. Because everything is unfamiliar. I remember being desperately sad in a way that felt physical. Not just tears, but this deep ache in my chest like grief. I remember crying my eyes out on the shower floor, because sometimes the shower is the only place you can fall apart without feeling exposed. Water covers the sound. Steam fogs the mirror. You can sit on the tile and let the sobs come. And for a few minutes, you don't have to pretend you're okay. You don't have to be brave. You don't have to hold your face together. But even then, the practical reality kept pushing in. I wasn't going home yet. I still had travel plans. I was looking down the barrel of a week in Germany with friends who, honestly, turned out not to be real friends in the way you need in a crisis. They refused to even acknowledge my breakup. They didn't check on me, didn't create space for me to talk, didn't offer comfort, didn't treat it like something that mattered. They just acted like nothing happened. Like my heartbreak was an inconvenience to the itinerary. And that kind of emotional coldness, stacked on top of what he did, made everything worse. Because it's one thing to be dumped. It's another thing to feel like nobody cares that you've been dumped. So there I was, heartbroken, alone, and still having to move through airports, trains, hotels, schedules, while my insides were collapsing. I remember crying on the flights home, I don't even mean a single quiet tear. I mean crying the way you do when you can't stop it, when you're trying to keep it contained and it keeps spilling out anyway. Crying in your seat while strangers stare or pretend not to. Crying while the plane hums around you and you feel like you're living in a nightmare where your life is split in half and you're trapped in the middle of it. And of course, because life loves to add extra stress when you already feel like you're dying inside, the flights were delayed. More waiting, more announcements, more sitting in uncomfortable chairs with swollen eyes, trying to hold it together while people around you complain about minor inconveniences. It felt like the universe was dragging it out on purpose, like it wouldn't even let me get home quickly to collapse in private. Every delay was another stretch of time where I had to exist in public while I felt completely broken. At the time, it truly felt like the worst breakup ever. Not just because of what he said, but because of where I was when he said it, and how little support I had around me afterward. It was like being emotionally hit by a truck and then being told, okay, now go navigate a foreign city, travel with people who don't care, and sit through delayed flights while you try not to fall apart. It was a total nightmare. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. But the strangest part is that now, with distance, I can see it differently. Now I can say, I dodged a bullet, and I mean it. Because anyone who can treat you like that, anyone who can accept your money and your love and your commitment, act distant while you're trying to hold the trip together, wait until an hour before leaving to tell you they don't love you anymore, and then still expect to live in your house as friends, is not someone who would have been a safe life partner. That's not someone who would have carried you through hard times. That's someone who would have taken and taken until you were empty and then acted surprised when you finally protected yourself. It doesn't make the pain from that moment disappear. It doesn't erase the memory of being on a shower floor in a London hotel, shaking with grief. It doesn't change how lonely it felt to have uncaring friends around you who refused to even acknowledge what happened. It doesn't undo the humiliation of crying on planes and in airports, waiting through delays while your heart was in pieces. But it does give the story a different ending, because the ending isn't I was abandoned and that's all. The ending is I survived it. I came home, and I learned something important about what I will never accept again. Because it forced clarity. It forced the kind of clarity you don't get when you're still hoping someone will change. It forced you to see that love isn't just a drunk promise about marriage or a sweet moment here and there. Love is also timing, empathy, accountability, and basic respect. Love is not using you financially and emotionally and then dropping you in a foreign country like your feelings are nothing. Love is not expecting to keep living comfortably in your house after crushing you. Love is not treating your heartbreak like background noise. And even though it was a nightmare, even though it felt like the worst breakup of your life, you still did something strong in the middle of it. You told him to pack his stuff and be gone. You drew a line. You protected your future self. You didn't let him turn your home into some awkward halfway space where he could keep benefiting from you while pretending the relationship was over. In shock, in pain, in a city far from home, you still chose yourself. That matters. It's also okay to mourn the version of him you believed in, the version that asked about marriages when he was drunk, the version you built a future around, the version you thought you were investing in. Because you weren't wrong for believing in love. You weren't wrong for hoping. You weren't wrong for wanting a life with someone. The wrong part was him using that hope without matching it with real commitment. If you ever catch yourself thinking, how did I not see it sooner? Remember this. People don't show their worst side on day one. They reveal it slowly, and often at the exact moment when they think you're too invested to leave. That's why it hurts so much, because it's not just a breakup. It's betrayal of trust, betrayal of effort, betrayal of the future you were building in your head. And when that betrayal happens, in a place like London, in a hotel, far from home, it magnifies everything. It turns heartbreak into a survival situation. But you got through it. You got on the flights even when you were crying. You made it through the delays even when every minute felt unbearable. You made it home even when you felt shattered. And now you can look back and see the truth. The bullet wasn't just dodged, it was aimed right at the center of your life. And you moved just in time. That doesn't make what happened okay, but it does mean you didn't lose him the way it felt like you did. You lost an illusion. You lost a future that would have eventually turned into something worse, because a person capable of that kind of coldness would not have turned into a supportive husband. He would have turned into a bigger problem. And as horrible as that trip was, it ended with you reclaiming your home, your space, and your right to not be treated like an option. And honestly, after something like that, it makes sense that it still sits in your body as one of the worst memories. Because it wasn't just pain. It was pain in a place where you had nowhere to hide. It was the loneliness of a hotel room, the sting of being ignored by friends, the long public endurance of airports and planes, the delays, the crying, the feeling of being trapped inside heartbreak while the world kept moving around you like nothing happened. But you're here now, and the fact that you can name it for what it was, a nightmare, and still call it a bullet dodged shows exactly how strong you actually are. He begged me for 6 months to meet up and go to a music festival with him, and the whole time I was trying to be honest about the one thing that always makes situations like this hard for me. I can't travel well. It's not a cute little quirk. It's not me being dramatic. It's a real limitation that takes planning and energy, and it's something I only push through when I feel safe with the person I'm doing it for. So for him to push and push and push for that long, to chase me that hard, it made me believe it meant something. It made me believe he actually wanted to be with me and was willing to put effort into seeing me. That's what being begged does to you. It softens you. It convinces you. You start thinking, okay, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I should give this a chance. Maybe he really means it this time. You don't keep begging someone for 6 months just to toss them away, right? You don't build anticipation like that. You don't act like you're dying to see them. You don't make them feel chosen, and then turn around and treat them like disposable. That would be insane. But that's exactly what he did. When we finally met up and went to the festival, it was actually good. That's another part that messes with your head, because if it had been awkward or bad, you could say, okay, maybe we just didn't click in person. Maybe it was a mistake. But it wasn't like that. We had a great time. There were moments that felt real. There were laughs, music, that kind of shared excitement you only get when you're in a crowd. And the lights are going, and the songs hit at the right time, and you feel like you re-part of something. And in those moments, it's easy to believe the story you've been wanting to believe. It's easy to think, this is it. This is the start of something. This is why he worked so hard to make this happen. Then, immediately after the festival, he broke up with me, not slowly, not after a thoughtful conversation, not with any gentleness, just right after, like the whole purpose was the festival. Like I was a +1 for an experience, and once he got what he wanted, he was done. The timing felt so cold it was almost surreal. It made the entire 6 months before it feel like a setup, like he had one goal and I was just the thing he used to reach it. I was still processing the shock of that when he started begging again, but this time it was different. This time it was, please stay friends, please don't hate me, please keep me in your life. And I remember how confusing that was, because how do you break someone's heart and then act like you deserve continued access to them? How do you drop a breakup on someone immediately after making them push through something hard like travel, and then start asking for friendship like it's a reasonable request? But I was vulnerable. I was hurt. I was still trying to make sense of it. And part of me, even though I was angry, still cared. So I listened. I tried to be mature. I tried to be fair. I tried to keep the peace. Because that's what a lot of people do when they're shocked and still hoping the person will show basic decency. And then he completely ghosted me. Not the slow fade. Not the occasional dry reply. I mean, he was gone. After begging me to stay friends, after acting like he needed that connection, he vanished like I was nothing, like I didn't exist, like my feelings were just something he could stir up and then ignore. And that's the part that really turns your stomach, because ghosting after a breakup is already cruel, but ghosting after you begged someone to stay friends is a special kind of cowardly. It's like he wanted the comfort of being forgiven without having to do any of the work of being accountable. He wanted to feel like a good guy, like, see, I tried to be friends, and then he wanted to disappear when it got real. So I did what people do in those situations. I tried to move on. I tried to heal. I tried to accept that the whole thing was a mess and that I wasn't going to get closure. I tried to tell myself, okay, he's gone, he made his choice, let it die. Then 3 months later, he came back, and not even in a way that showed remorse or growth. He came back like nothing had happened, like he hadn't ghosted me, like he hadn't begged for friendship, and then disappeared. He came back asking if I still wanted him to go with me to another show, one I had bought advanced tickets for. That detail still makes my blood boil, because it shows you exactly how his mind works. He wasn't coming back to apologize. He wasn't coming back because he missed me as a person. He was coming back because there was a show, there were tickets, there was a fun experience available, and he thought he could just slide back into my life like I was a storage unit for his entertainment. It was so shameless that I almost couldn't believe it. Like, he genuinely thought he could ghost me and then return when it was convenient, and I'd just say, sure, come along, like my emotions were a minor inconvenience. Like the way he treated me was something that could be brushed aside because he wanted a night out. And then, as if the whole situation wasn't already ridiculous enough, he told me he got married 3 months after breaking up with me. Married. 3 months. That's not, I met someone and it moved quickly. That's either someone who was already involved long before he ended things with me, or someone who has no idea what honesty is and no respect for the people he's using, because there's just no clean, respectful version of that timeline that matches the way he was acting with me. The more you look at it, the clearer it becomes that he was lying the entire time. Because the whole time he told me he was single. The whole time he kept calling himself my boyfriend, and even my husband, like it was a joke, like it was flirting, like it was sweet. And if someone is calling themselves your boyfriend and husband while telling you they're single, while begging you for months to meet up, while having a great time with you, and then they're married 3 months later, it makes you feel sick. It makes you realize you weren't just dumped, you were played. And what really messes with your head is how many layers of deception there are in that kind of situation. It's not one lie. It's a whole personality built out of lies. It's the pretending, the begging, the love-bombing energy, the performance of commitment, then the sudden discard, then the let's be friends act, then the ghosting, then the return, then the marriage revelation. It's like a cycle designed to keep you confused and off balance, so you never get to stand still long enough to say, wait a second, who are you really? At first you might think, maybe he was just confused, maybe he didn't know what he wanted. But no, confusion doesn't explain the calculated parts. Confusion doesn't explain ghosting right after begging for friendship. Confusion doesn't explain popping back up when there's a show and tickets. Confusion doesn't explain calling himself your boyfriend and husband while apparently lining up a marriage. That's not confusion. That's manipulation, selfishness, and a complete lack of respect. And it leaves you with this gross feeling that he treated you like a placeholder. Like you were someone to fill time with, someone to get attention from, someone to have experiences with, someone to keep around as an option, all while he was building a different life behind your back. It's humiliating, not because you did anything wrong, but because you were honest and he wasn't. You were real and he was acting. You were responding to what you thought was a relationship, and he was using relationship language like it was a tool. It also makes you question everything. You start replaying conversations and wondering what was real. You start thinking about moments that felt intimate and realizing he might have been saying the same lines to someone else. You start wondering if the festival was his idea because he wanted a fun trip and needed company. You start wondering if he begged for 6 months because he loves chasing, not because he loves you. You start wondering if he wanted to stay friends because he wanted to keep you available, not because he cared. You start wondering if he ghosted because he got what he wanted and didn't want to face the emotional mess he created. And you know what? You're allowed to be angry about that. You're allowed to say, fuck that, because it is that. It's disrespectful and cruel and gross. People like that don't just hurt you by leaving. They hurt you by wasting your time and corrupting your trust. They leave you holding confusion like a bag you didn't pack. But here's the part that matters. And it matters even if it doesn't make the pain disappear. The way he behaved is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of his character. You didn't get fooled because you were stupid. You got fooled because you were trusting. You believed his words because you expected him to be a normal person. You responded to the boyfriend and husband talk because you assumed those words meant something. You gave him a chance because you thought people don't beg for 6 months unless they're serious. Those are normal assumptions. The problem is that he wasn't operating normally. He was operating opportunistically. And the fact that he came back after ghosting tells you something too. It tells you he expected you to still be there. He expected you to still be available. He expected you to still care enough to say yes. That's why he did it. Not because he respected you, but because he thought you'd accept crumbs. He thought you'd accept convenience. He thought you'd accept being treated like an option. It's also telling that he revealed the marriage like it was just information, not like it was something that would understandably blow your mind. People who have empathy usually realize what that kind of news does to someone. They understand the impact. They understand the betrayal. They understand that it forces you to reframe the entire relationship. But someone who can do what he did often doesn't care about impact. They care about what they can get away with. If there's any closure in this story, it's the clarity. Because once someone shows you that they can lie that easily and use people that casually, you don't have to keep trying to understand them. You don't have to keep trying to interpret their mixed signals. The truth is simple. He wasn't safe. He wasn't honest. He wasn't consistent. He wasn't respectful. And even though it hurts, it also means you don't have to romanticize what you lost. What you lost was a person who was willing to treat you like a toy he could pick up and put down. And you deserve better than that. Not in a cheesy, empty way, in a practical way. You deserve someone whose words match their behavior. Someone who doesn't beg for months just to discard you. Someone who doesn't ask for friendship and then vanish. Someone who doesn't come back for tickets and entertainment. Someone who doesn't call themselves your boyfriend or husband while hiding a whole marriage timeline. Someone who treats your time and your heart like they matter. Because they do. I was really young when it happened, around 10 years old, maybe even a bit younger, which is part of why the memory feels so strange. It's one of those moments from childhood that should blur over time, like most nights do, but this one never did. If anything, it stayed too clear. Not every detail, not like I could draw you a map, but the feeling of it, the way the night looked, the way my stomach dropped when I saw him. That part has never faded. It was a family wedding, one of those big gatherings where the venue feels like its own little world for the night. There were lights inside, music, people laughing, adults talking in groups, kids running around half supervised because everyone assumes the kids are safe as long as they stay close. I remember it being late in the evening, late enough that the sky had turned that deep, dark blue shade it gets right before it becomes full night. The kind of sky that still holds a little color, but you can tell darkness has taken over. A full moon was out, not a thin crescent, not something you barely notice, but a proper full moon that makes the world look different. Moonlight does that thing where it turns everything pale and slightly unreal. It makes bright things look brighter, and it makes shadows sharper. It also makes distance harder to judge. Things far away look flatter, like they belong on a stage. The venue backed onto a massive field. I don't mean a normal little patch of grass. I mean a very big open field that stretched far enough that you couldn't clearly see the end of it, especially at night. The entrance to it had this big metal gate, the kind you'd expect at the edge of farmland or a big property. It was heavy, tall, and it swung on hinges, and to a couple of bored kids at a wedding, that gate might as well have been a playground ride. Me and my cousin were outside because we were restless. He was about a year younger than me, and we were at that age where you don't want to sit with the adults for too long. You want to move, you want to explore. You want to feel like you've found something that belongs to you. We were swinging on the gate, pushing it back and forth, hanging off it, making it clank a little. It wasn't exactly allowed, but nobody was paying close attention, and it felt harmless. I remember laughing at something my cousin said, and then both of us went quiet, almost at the same time, like we'd sensed a change without speaking it. We looked out into the field. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was just a figure far away, so far that normally you wouldn't even pay attention. The field was dark, and the moonlight made everything look washed out, but you could still tell when something was moving out there. People don't usually walk in the middle of a huge field during a wedding night. And what we saw wasn't just a person. It was a guy way out in the field, and he was glowing. That's the only word that fits, even now. Glowing, like he had a light inside him. He wasn't holding a flashlight. There wasn't a car behind him. It wasn't like a reflective jacket catching headlights. His skin looked white. His clothes looked white. Everything about him looked bright. like he was radiating this pale light, almost like he'd been dipped in something luminous. I remember staring and thinking my eyes were messing with me. When you're a kid, you're used to your brain playing tricks in the dark. Shadows look like monsters. Trees look like people. But this wasn't a shadow. This wasn't something vague. It was a clear shape of a person moving across the field, and he looked like a bright spot in the darkness. Me and my cousin just stood there on the gate, not swinging anymore, holding onto the cold metal like it could keep us steady. We looked at each other for a second, like we needed to confirm we were both seeing the same thing. Neither of us laughed. Neither of us shrugged it off. The look on my cousin's face told me immediately that this wasn't just my imagination. We started trying to get his attention. We shouted. We waved our arms. We did the usual kid thing where you assume if you see a person, they must be able to see you. I don't remember the exact words we yelled, but I remember the urgency in it, that mix of excitement and confusion. Part of us was curious, and part of us was nervous, and we didn't know which feeling to listen to. The figure kept walking at first, like he hadn't noticed us. Then he stopped. He stopped so suddenly that it made my stomach drop because it meant he heard us, or he sensed us, or he was aware. He turned his head toward our direction, and even though he was far away, it felt like his attention landed right on us, like a spotlight. Like when you're a kid and you do something you're not supposed to do, and suddenly you realize an adult is watching. But he didn't just look at us. He walked a little until he was positioned under the full moon, almost like he did it on purpose, like he wanted the moon behind him. In that moment, the glow seemed even stronger, because the moonlight framed him and made him stand out against the dark field. And then he lifted his arm and pointed up toward the moon. He didn't point toward us. He didn't wave. He didn't gesture for us to come closer or go away. He pointed upward, straight at the full moon, while staring in our direction. That image is stuck in my mind like a photograph, a bright white figure far out in the field, standing under the full moon, arm raised, finger pointing up, and his face angled toward us, like he knew we were watching. Me and my cousin didn't say anything. We didn't even shout anymore. We just froze. It wasn't just confusion. It was the feeling that we had stepped into something we didn't understand. As kids, we expected adults to behave in predictable ways. Even strangers. If someone saw kids shouting, they might shout back, or wave, or ignore them. But pointing at the moon while staring at us felt like a message, and we didn't have the tools to decode it. It went on for maybe 10 seconds. 10 seconds sounds short, but when you're watching something that makes no sense, 10 seconds stretches out. It becomes this long, uncomfortable pause where you're waiting for the normal explanation to arrive, and it doesn't. Then he lowered his arm and started walking again, continuing across the field like nothing happened, like pointing at the moon had been the whole purpose. My cousin grabbed the gate tighter. I remember feeling the cold metal through my hands and suddenly being aware of how quiet it was outside compared to the wedding inside. The music was still there, but muffled, distant, like it belonged to a different reality. Out by the field, it was just us, the darkness, and this glowing man moving through it. We watched him until he reached a swing set out there, set back in the field like a small playground area. As he walked behind it, his bright shape became partially blocked by the frame of the swings, and then he was gone. Not like he faded slowly into the darkness the way someone normally would as they walk farther away. He didn't keep moving until he became too small to see. He disappeared behind that swing set and never came out the other side. No shape reappeared. No glow moved away. It was like he stepped behind it and vanished. That was the moment my cousin and I really broke. The fear finally caught up. Because if he'd simply kept walking, we might have told ourselves he was wearing a costume or white clothes, and the moonlight was making it look weird. But disappearing like that, behind something as ordinary as a swing set, didn't fit. There wasn't anywhere for him to go quickly enough. The field was open. We could see enough to know there weren't trees right there, or a building he could slip into. The swing set wasn't tall or wide enough to hide a full-grown man for more than a second. If he had kept walking, we should have seen him again, but we didn't. I don't remember us screaming. I don't remember us running inside in a dramatic way. What I do remember is the way we just stood there for a few seconds, still staring at the swing set, waiting for him to reappear, and he didn't. And then we looked at each other again, and we both had the same expression, like we'd just been shown something we couldn't explain, and we weren't sure if we were allowed to talk about it. We went back toward the venue after that, but everything felt different. The lights inside looked too warm, too normal. The adults laughing looked like they belonged in a world that made sense. I remember wanting to tell someone, but at the same time I didn't want to, because I could already imagine how it would go. Adults would say it was a prank. They'd say it was someone wearing white. They'd say it was our imagination. They'd laugh gently, the way adults laugh when kids describe something scary. So we didn't make a big scene. Maybe we mentioned it quietly to each other. Maybe we whispered about it. But we didn't drag adults outside to see. And even if we had, it would have been too late. He was already gone. The strangest part is that, even years later, I still can't find an explanation that feels right. I've tried. I've replayed it in my head, trying to be fair, trying to be logical. Could it have been someone in a costume? Maybe. Weddings sometimes have weird guests. Could it have been someone wearing bright clothes that reflected the moon? Possibly. But the way the entire figure seemed to glow, not just certain parts, and the way he pointed at the moon like it meant something, and the way he vanished behind the swing set without reappearing, those parts don't sit comfortably with the costume idea. And the reason it stays with me isn't because I'm trying to turn it into a paranormal story. It stays with me because it's one of those memories where I can still feel how my body reacted. The cold confusion, the tightening in my chest, the sudden awareness that I was small, standing at the edge of a huge field under a huge moon, and something out there had noticed me noticing it. Sometimes, if I let my mind wander too far, I think about what it felt like emotionally. It didn't feel playful. It didn't feel like a guy trying to be funny. It felt oddly calm, almost deliberate, like he wasn't lost or confused, like he was doing what he was there to do, and us seeing him was just something that happened along the way. I also think about the pointing, because that's the part that makes it feel like a message. Why point at the moon? Why not wave? Why not walk toward us? Why stop under the moon specifically, like he wanted the moon to be part of what we saw? Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a strange coincidence that my child brain turned into something bigger. But the problem is, my cousin saw it too. We both reacted the same. We both watched him disappear. And that shared witnessing is what keeps it from sliding into, maybe I imagined it. Even now, I can still picture the field and the gate, and that pale glow moving in the distance. I can still picture him stopping and turning and raising his arm. I can still see him framed under the full moon, pointing upward, holding that pose long enough for it to feel intentional. And I can still remember the exact kind of silence that came after he disappeared, the way the night suddenly felt too big, and the way the swing set looked completely ordinary again, like it had never hidden anything at all. I don't know what it was. I honestly don't. I've never seen anything like it since. But that one night at that wedding, standing by the gate with my cousin, watching a glowing man point at the moon and vanish into the dark, is something I've carried for years, because no explanation I've ever come up with has been able to make that memory feel normal.
Quick interruption. I'll keep it short. A lot of people pass through here once and never come back. But the ones who hit subscribe, they're the regulars now. The ones who show up every single night without fail. If you'd like to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn the bell on too, and you'll never have to wonder when the next one drops. That's everything. Story's still going. Let's get back to it.
The day before my grandfather died, he said something that sounded simple in the moment, almost like he was trying to keep the mood light. My brother and I were with him, and he looked at us the way he always did when he was being half serious and half playful, like he was leaving a little joke behind so we wouldn't fall apart. He told us that in the future, he'd be waiting for us at the bar, ready to buy us a beer. It wasn't said like some grand spiritual goodbye. It was said like him, casual, warm, a bit cheeky, like he was already picturing it, like he wanted that to be the image we carried instead of hospital rooms and fear. At the time, I don't think either of us understood how hard that sentence would land later. You hear a lot of things around death. People try to say the right words. They try to comfort. They try to make promises that are mostly for the living. But this didn't feel like that. It felt like a personal message between him and us, like he was making a plan, like he was setting a future point on a map and saying, "Meet me there." Then he died, and the world did what it always does after a death. It kept moving even though it felt wrong that it could. There were days where everything was busy and loud, and then moments where it went quiet and the reality of it slammed back in. A month passed, but it didn't feel like a clean month. It felt like a blur of grief, routines, strange little reminders, and the constant sense that something had been removed from the shape of your life. People say time helps, but in that first month it's not healing. It's just distance, and sometimes distance makes it worse, because it gives you more room to feel the absence. By then, that line about the bar had become one of those things that would pop into my head when I least expected it. I'd think of him saying it and feel that sharp mix of love and pain, because it was such a him thing to say, and now he wasn't here to say anything at all. Then came the dream. It wasn't one of those long dreams where you drift through scenes and nothing makes sense. This was different. It was short, unbelievably short, like it lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it was so vivid that it didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt like I stepped into something. The details had weight. The lighting had that warm, bar-like glow. I remember how clear it was, how real it felt, the way a dream usually isn't. In the dream, I was walking into a bar I didn't recognize. It wasn't a place I'd been before, at least not in waking life, but it had that familiar layout. The smell you can almost imagine even in a dream, the dim warmth, the sense of people being around, even if you can't quite see their faces. The sound was muted, like everything was slightly softened, but it still felt like a real room. And there he was. My grandpa was sitting at the bar like he belonged there, like he had been waiting the whole time. He wasn't sick. He wasn't fragile. He looked like himself in the way you want someone to look when you miss them. The way they looked when they were still fully them. He was sitting on a bar stool, and then he turned, like he heard us come in. He spun the chair around toward us in one smooth motion. He had a beer in each hand. That part hit me so hard, even in the dream, because it wasn't random. It wasn't symbolic in some vague dream way. It was exactly what he said he would do. It matched the promise. He was literally holding out the future he'd talked about. He looked right at us and said, "Plain as anything, you guys ready for that beer?" I remember the feeling in my chest in that moment. Like everything in me went tight and open at the same time. Like my heart recognized him before my mind could even catch up. And then I looked to my right. My brother was there, standing next to me in the dream, exactly like he would in real life, close enough that I could sense him without even turning fully. It wasn't like a dream where people shift faces or roles. It was him, clearly, solidly, like the dream was making sure there was no confusion, like it needed me to know we were both there. And then I woke up. Not gently, not drifting out of sleep the way you normally do. I snapped awake so fast it felt like someone yanked me upward by the collar. My eyes flew open. My body jolted. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was trying to climb out of my chest. I scared my wife and my dog because I came up like I'd been shocked. I was breathing hard, panting, that kind of breathing you do after a jump scare. Like your body is convinced something just happened that it needs to survive. For a second, I couldn't even orient myself. I just lay there in the dark, staring, trying to understand why I felt so shaken. The dream had been short, but it left a huge wake behind it, like a boat cutting through water. I could still see the bar in my mind. I could still see him holding the beers. I could still hear his voice saying that line like it was the most natural thing in the world. My wife mumbled something, half asleep, asking if I was okay. The dog shifted, startled, nails tapping softly, and then settled again when I didn't move. I didn't even know how to answer her because I didn't feel okay, but I also didn't know what to call what I'd just experienced. I reached for my phone mostly out of reflex, the way people do when they wake up suddenly, like checking the time can anchor you back in reality. My hand felt shaky. My mouth was dry. My heart still hadn't slowed down. I picked up the phone, and right as I did, I got a text from my brother. It wasn't a long message. It was one of those blunt, immediate texts that only comes when someone's unsettled. He said, "Hey, I just had a fucked up dream." I stared at that text for a second like my brain couldn't process it. The timing felt too perfect, too sharp, like a needle. I could still see my grandpa's face. I could still hear his voice. The air in the room felt weird, like the dream had followed me into waking life and was now sitting there with me. My hand started trembling a little more as I replied, because suddenly I already knew what he was going to say. I didn't even want to type it, because typing it would make it real, the way saying things out loud can make them heavier. But I asked anyway, something like, "What dream?" And then he told me. Same bar, same moment, same grandpa, same beers, same line, the same dream. That's the part that still messes with me the most. Because one person having a vivid dream about a loved one after they die, that's normal. People dream about grief all the time. Your brain tries to process loss. It tries to give you closure. It tries to give you one more conversation. That's understandable. But both of us, at the same time, having the same short, vivid scene that matched something he said the day before he died, that felt like something else. It didn't feel like two separate brains doing separate grief processing. It felt linked. It felt coordinated, like we both walked into the same place for a few seconds and then got thrown back out of it. Lying there in the dark, phone glowing in my hand, I felt that mix of emotions you can't really name. Fear, because it was unsettling and not normal. Sadness, because hearing his voice, even in a dream, made the loss feel fresh all over again. and also something like comfort, because the dream wasn't violent or cruel. It wasn't him suffering. It was him being him. It was him following through on his promise in the most literal way possible. And the weirdest part was how clean the message was. No extra symbolism, no strange dream logic. Just a bar, 2 beers, and 1 sentence. You guys ready for that beer? It was almost like he wanted it to be simple so we wouldn't doubt what it meant. Like, he didn't want us to wake up and argue over it or brush it off as random. Like he wanted us to remember the promise, and he wanted us to feel, even for a second, that he was still connected to us in some way. After my brother confirmed it was the same dream, I couldn't sleep for a long time. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart slowly settle back into its normal rhythm. But my mind wouldn't settle. I kept replaying the scene. I kept thinking about how my brother had been standing to my right in the dream, and how that detail now felt almost like proof. Not proof in a scientific way, but proof in a personal way. Like the dream itself was saying, this wasn't just for you. This was for both of you. I wanted to wake my wife up fully and tell her everything, but I also didn't want to make it into a big thing at 2 in the morning. The house was quiet. The dog was finally calm again. My wife was drifting back to sleep, and I was sitting there holding something too strange to place into ordinary conversation. So I stayed quiet for a while, just reading my brother's text again and again, feeling that cold little ripple in my stomach that comes when reality doesn't behave the way you expect it to. To this day, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe grief works in similar ways when 2 people are missing the same person and carrying the same final words. Maybe we both had that sentence planted in our minds so deeply that our brains built the same scene around it at the same time. That's possible, and part of me tries to hold on to that explanation because it's safer. But another part of me remembers how vivid it was, how short it was, how it didn't feel like a normal dream, and how it lined up with something he said, as if he knew he would be gone soon and wanted to leave us with one clear moment that would stick. If it was just a dream, it was still one of the strongest dreams I've ever had, because it didn't fade the way dreams usually fade. It stayed sharp, it stayed detailed, and the fact that my brother woke up too, disturbed enough to text me immediately, makes it feel like it wasn't meant to be forgotten. Sometimes I think that was the point. Maybe it was nothing more than our minds reaching for the same comfort at the same time. Or maybe it was my grandfather keeping his promise the only way he could, showing up for a few seconds in a place neither of us recognized. Holding 2 beers like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, and asking us if we were ready. Either way, it changed something in me, because after that, I stopped thinking of his last words as just something he said to lighten the mood. I started thinking of them as a message that kept echoing forward, like a thread he left behind. And whenever I picture him now, I don't always picture the end. I picture that bar. I picture him spinning around on that stool, beers in both hands, looking at us like we'd only been gone for a minute. You guys ready for that beer? And somewhere in the back of my mind, I still don't know if that was grief, coincidence, or something else entirely. But I know my brother saw it too. A few days after my grandfather died, the house still didn't feel normal. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. It's hard to explain unless you've been there, but grief changes the air in a place. Even the quiet sounds different. The rooms feel heavier, like they're holding on to what happened. People speak softer, and when they stop talking, the silence has this strange weight to it, like it's listening. That night, it was late, and my mom was in the kitchen. The kitchen was usually the most familiar room in our home, the one place that always felt steady, no matter what was going on. But after he passed, even that room felt off. The light seemed too bright in some corners and too dim in others. The normal comfort of it was replaced with something tense and fragile, like anything could make her break down all over again. I walked in and saw her standing near the table, crying the kind of crying you don't do in public. Not quiet tears, not a few sniffles, but full-on bawling, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands, like she couldn't hold it inside anymore. The sound of it made my chest tighten immediately. It wasn't just sadness. It was that deep kind of pain, the kind that comes when someone is truly gone and you realize the world keeps going anyway. I didn't know what to say. I don't think there was anything I could say, so I did the only thing that felt right. I walked over and hugged her. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tightly, and for a moment the kitchen felt smaller, like everything else disappeared, and it was just the two of us standing there in that pain. She leaned into me, still crying, still shaking. And I remember thinking how strange it was that grief could make a person feel both heavy and empty at the same time. On the table in front of us were a lot of my grandfather's belongings. We had been going through things since he died, sorting through what was left behind, trying to decide what to keep, what to pack away, what to give to family. There were photos scattered around, some old, some newer. There were pieces of clothing he used to wear, folded and stacked. There were small personal things too, the kind that don't seem important until the person is gone, and then suddenly they feel priceless, because they're proof he was real and here and part of our lives. Among those things was a radio. It was one of those older radios he had kept around, the kind that had probably sat in a garage or a shed at some point. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't even working. It was broken. I remember that clearly, not just acting up or needs fixing, but broken in a way where you didn't even bother trying to use it. On top of that, it didn't have working batteries in it. I'm not sure if there were batteries inside at all, but I know it wasn't powered. It was just sitting there, an object on a table, with no purpose other than being one of his things. My mom was still crying into my shoulder. I could feel her breath catching, that shaky rhythm grief gives you. I was holding her and looking down at the table without really seeing anything. My mind in that fog you get when everything is too emotional and you're trying to stay strong for someone else. Then out of nowhere, the radio made a sound, a loud, harsh static burst. It wasn't a soft crackle. It wasn't a faint click you could ignore. It was a sharp, sudden noise, like a radio being turned on between stations for a split second. It lasted maybe a second, not long, but loud enough to cut through everything. Loud enough that it felt like it took up the whole kitchen. My mom stopped crying immediately. Not slowly, not like she was calming down anyway, but abruptly, like someone had pressed pause on her. Her body went still in my arms. The crying so fast, it almost scared me more than the sound did. She pulled back slightly, and we both stared at the radio. Neither of us spoke. The kitchen went silent in that strange way, where the silence feels louder because something just happened. We just looked at it, both of us trying to understand what we had heard. I could see it on her face too. It wasn't just me. She heard it. She didn't question whether it was real. The fact that she stopped crying because of it told me everything. If it had been something small, or something only I noticed, she would have kept crying. But that sound made her freeze. For a moment, I honestly expected it to happen again. I stared at the radio, waiting for another burst of static, another crackle, anything that would explain it. But nothing came. The radio just sat there, silent and lifeless on the table, surrounded by photos and clothes and pieces of a man's life that we were still trying to accept was over. I felt my stomach twist, not exactly with fear, but with that eerie feeling you get when something happens that doesn't fit your understanding of the world. Like your brain is flipping through reasons and none of them land. The radio had no power. It was broken. There was no one else in the room. The noise was too clear and too loud to be a random settling sound from the house. It didn't sound like a pipe. It didn't sound like the fridge. It sounded exactly like radio static. My mom's eyes were fixed on it. Her face was wet from tears, and her expression had shifted into something I can't fully describe. Not comfort, not joy, not even fear exactly, just shock, and something else underneath it. Like her grief had been interrupted by a question she didn't know how to answer. Because what do you do with a moment like that? If you say it out loud, you make it bigger. If you explain it away too quickly, you feel like you're disrespecting something. And if you treat it like a sign, you risk sounding crazy, even to yourself. We both stood there, staring, and I could feel the as on my arms lifted in that quiet electric way they do when you're unsettled. I remember thinking, maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe there was some leftover battery charge. Maybe the radio had some kind of loose connection and being moved earlier made it do that. Maybe something on the table shifted. Maybe the air was dry and there was static electricity, and something triggered the speaker. My brain kept trying to protect me with logic, offering explanations like a shield. But none of the explanations felt strong enough to fully settle it. And there was another thought too, one that arrived softly and stayed in the background because I was almost afraid to hold it. What if it was him? Not in a dramatic movie way, not a ghost standing in the doorway. Just a small, strange moment, a flicker of sound at the exact time my mom was breaking down, like something tapping on the surface of the world to say, I'm here. I'm not gone in the way you think I am. It's the kind of thought you don't say out loud because it can feel too vulnerable. It can feel like wishful thinking, but it was there. My mom didn't say anything. She didn't cry again either. She just looked at the radio a few seconds longer, then looked at me, like she was checking my face to confirm I had heard it too. I nodded slightly because I didn't know what else to do. That tiny nod felt like an agreement without words. Yes, that happened, and no, we don't know why. After that, we didn't talk about it. Not that night. Not the next day. Not later. We just went to bed. It was almost like we both made the same decision at the same time, without discussing it. We were already carrying so much grief that we didn't have room for something mysterious on top of it. We didn't want to turn it into a story. We didn't want to argue about whether it was paranormal. We didn't want to pull the radio apart and test it and ruin the fragile feeling that maybe, just maybe, it meant something. So we went to bed, and the house stayed quiet. In the days that followed, everything went on the way it always does after someone dies. There were practical things to handle, calls to make, family members asking questions, people offering condolences. Life kept moving, even though it felt wrong that it could move without him in it. The radio stayed with the other belongings, and every time I saw it, I felt that same little pinch in my chest, like the memory of that static sound was still sitting inside it. And even though neither of us spoke about it, I know my mom remembered it. You don't forget something like that. Especially not when it happens in the middle of the rawest part of grief. It became one of those quiet memories that lives in the space between two people. A thing you both witnessed and both decided to leave untouched. Almost like speaking about it might break it or make it disappear into ordinary explanations. It's strange. because that's the only truly unexplainable thing I've ever experienced. I've never been someone who collects ghost stories. I don't have a list of paranormal moments. I've never seen figures, never heard voices calling my name, never had objects move across a room. That 1 second of static from a broken, powerless radio is it. And maybe that's why it sticks so strongly, because it's the only time reality felt like it slipped slightly out of place. Even now, when I think back to that moment, I can still picture the kitchen exactly as it was. The table cluttered with his things, the photos, the clothes, the radio sitting there like a useless object. My mom crying so hard, her whole body shook. Me hugging her, trying to be steady for both of us. Then that burst of static, sharp and loud, cutting through the grief like a knife through fabric, and the way the air changed afterward. Not physically, maybe, but emotionally. The crying stopped. The room went still. It was like time paused for a second, and we both stepped into that silence together, just staring at the radio, feeling that eerie chill in the back of the mind that says, something just happened that we can't explain. I don't know what it was. I really don't. Maybe it was a weird mechanical fluke, maybe some tiny leftover charge or a loose wire. Maybe it was the universe playing a cruel little trick at the worst possible moment. Or maybe it was my grandfather. In whatever way a person can still reach for the people they love after they're gone, letting us know he was there, hearing her, noticing her pain. I don't have proof. I don't have a clear answer. All I have is that moment shared between me and my mom, sealed into memory by the fact that neither of us ever spoke of it again. Sometimes I think that's why it feels so eerie. Not just the static, but the silence we wrapped around it afterward. Like we both knew that whatever it was, it belonged to the space between grief and comfort, and neither of us was ready to label it. So it stayed as it was. A second of sound from a broken radio at the exact moment my mom needed something, and an unspoken understanding that some parts of loss are too strange, too tender, and too heavy to explain. My uncle has always been the kind of man who stays calm when everyone else starts getting dramatic. He's not someone who scares easily, and he definitely isn't the type to sit around making up stories for attention. That's part of why this still bothers me so much, because when he told it to me, he didn't tell it like a campfire tale. He told it like something that happened to him, something that still sits in the back of his mind years later, even though he's retired now and has no reason to keep thinking about it. He said it was one of those moments where, even if you want to be logical and laugh it off, your body reacts first. Your skin knows something is wrong before your brain has time to argue with it. Back when he was still working, he spent a lot of time in tunnels. It was normal to him. Tunnels are their own world, really. The air is different down there. Sounds bounce in a strange way. Light feels weak because it doesn't spread far. It just cuts a narrow path through the dark. And the deeper you are, the more it feels like the outside world doesn't exist. You're surrounded by earth and concrete and old brick, and all you can hear is your own breathing, your boots, your tools, and the distant voices of the people you're working with. If you've never been underground like that, it's hard to explain how quickly your senses change. You start paying attention to tiny shifts in sound and temperature, because that's all you have. A drip somewhere, a gust that shouldn't be there, a faint echo of movement. That day started like any other shift. My uncle went into one of the tunnels with 2 colleagues. Just 3 men doing their job. They weren't out hunting ghosts. They weren't looking for anything strange. They had work to do, and that's what they were focused on. He told me they'd stopped for a moment to handle something, some small task that needed attention. The kind of pause that happens 100 times in a workday. Nothing about it felt special at first. They were busy, talking lightly, thinking about the job, thinking about getting through the shift and going home. Then, out of nowhere, my uncle heard someone speak. It sounded like a man, close by, and he said my uncle's name. Not shouted, not distant, but like someone standing just a few steps away, speaking in a normal voice. The man said something like, "Hey, can you show me the way out?" My uncle told me that, at first, he didn't even react, like it was strange. That's the part that makes it creepier, because his brain just filed it under normal. When you work in a team, you're used to hearing your name. You're used to colleagues calling out questions. You're used to someone needing directions, especially in a place like a tunnel where routes can look the same and it's easy to get turned around. So my uncle, still focused on what he was doing, answered without thinking too hard. He said, "You know the way out." He assumed it was one of his guys asking. That's what he told me. He was so engaged in his work that he didn't even turn around right away. It wasn't like he heard the voice and thought, "Who is that?" It was more like, yeah, you know the way. He kept his hands busy, kept his attention on the task, the way you do when you're trying to get something done and you don't want to break your concentration. But then the man spoke again. This time he said, "I'm so cold." My uncle said the second those words left the man's mouth, the air around him changed. And when he told me this, he actually paused, like he was trying to find the right words for what he felt. He didn't say it was just a normal chill. He described it like the temperature dropped suddenly, like the warmth drained out of the space. He said he felt it crawl over his skin. He said it was the kind of cold that doesn't belong to the environment. The kind of cold that feels personal, like it's aimed at you. I remember asking him what he meant by that, because "the air dropped" is a strange phrase. He tried to explain it by saying it was like the tunnel itself had breathed out, and what came out was freezing. He said the cold hit him so fast that it made his stomach turn, and it didn't feel like a draft or a normal temperature shift. It felt heavy. It felt wrong. That's when he finally turned around. He had a light with him, and he swung it toward the man's voice. In that small circle of light, he saw someone standing there, and he told me, even before his mind could fully describe what he was looking at, he knew. That's what he said. He knew in a way that didn't come from logic. The feeling hit him first, like an instinct, like when you walk into a room and can tell immediately something bad has happened before anyone even speaks. He said. The man standing there wasn't like the other workers. He wasn't dressed like them. He wasn't holding the right kind of equipment. He didn't look like a guy who had wandered in by mistake. He said the man was wearing an old uniform, not just slightly old, but properly old, like something from decades ago. Dirty, worn, like it had been dragged through dust and time. And the strangest part was what he was holding. My uncle said the man had a lamp, but not the kind of lamp you'd ever take into a modern tunnel for work. It was a vintage lamp, the sort you picture in old photos. Something someone might have used before electric lighting was normal. The kind of thing you'd expect to see in a museum display about early underground work, not in a tunnel with a modern crew. My uncle stared at him, trying to make sense of it, and the man just looked back at him, not smiling, not joking, just standing there, lit by the beam, like he belonged to the tunnel more than my uncle did. Then the man said it again. "I'm so cold," my uncle said. He kept repeating it, over and over, like those were the only words he had left. "I'm so cold, I'm so cold," not screaming, just saying it, steady and hollow. The way some might speak when they're exhausted or sick or beyond panic and into something numb. At this point, my uncle's mind was trying to argue. He tried to think of explanations. Maybe it was someone from another team wearing some kind of costume for a joke. Maybe someone had gotten lost and was messing around. But he said the feeling in his body didn't match those ideas. His whole system was on alert. The cold was still there, pressing in, and the man's presence felt wrong, like the tunnel wasn't meant to have him in it. My uncle told me he spoke carefully, the way you do when you're dealing with someone who might be confused or unwell. He said he didn't want to be rude, and he didn't want to escalate anything. So he said, "I don't think you're supposed to be here, mate. Can you see a light anywhere?" He asked that because, in his mind, maybe the guy was lost. Maybe he'd come from another access point. Maybe he'd wandered in from somewhere he shouldn't be. My uncle thought if the man could see a light, then they could guide him out, get him to safety, figure out what was going on. But the man didn't answer like a normal person. He just looked straight at my uncle and said, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." My uncle said the way the man looked at him made his skin prickle. Not aggressive, not angry, but empty, like there was a distance behind his eyes. And the cold seemed to deepen when he spoke, as if the words carried it. My uncle told me he wasn't sure if his two colleagues had realized what was happening right away, because in those tunnels, people get spread out and sound echoes. Maybe they thought my uncle was talking to one of them. Maybe they didn't see the man yet. He said it all happened fast, but also slow, the way fear stretches time. The man kept repeating himself, "I'm so cold." And my uncle felt stuck between wanting to back away and wanting to do what you're supposed to do when someone needs help. Then one of the colleagues moved closer. My uncle said this colleague thought it was a joke at first. Maybe he saw the strange clothing, maybe he heard the voice, and his brain went straight to the easiest explanation. One of the lads is messing around. People do that sometimes, especially in uncomfortable environments to break the tension. So the colleague approached the man like he was about to tell him to knock it off. And then it happened. My uncle said the man just disappeared, not walked away, not stepped into a shadow, not turned a corner. He didn't fade slowly or become hard to see. He was there, solid enough to have a shape and clothes and a lamp, and then he was simply gone, right in front of them. Like someone had switched off a light, like the air had swallowed him. My uncle told me that moment is burned into his memory because there was no time to process it, no time to come up with a new explanation. 1 second, there was a man standing there, and the next second, there was nothing but empty space and the beam of the flashlight cutting through dust. All three of them reacted the same way. They ran. They didn't talk it out. They didn't stand around trying to be brave. They didn't go searching. They turned and moved as fast as they could, the way your body moves when fear hits the deepest part of you. My uncle said he could hear their boots slapping the ground, could hear their breathing, could hear the frantic sound of their own movement echoing off the tunnel walls. He said they didn't stop until they were out, until they were back in a place with normal air and normal light. When they finally stopped, they looked at each other like they'd all just woken from the same nightmare. My uncle said no one wanted to be the first to speak, because once you say it out loud, it becomes real. But they all knew what they'd seen. They all knew what had happened. The colleague who approached the man was pale, and he kept swearing under his breath, like he couldn't find any other words. After that, my uncle and those two colleagues refused to go back into that tunnel. He told me it wasn't negotiable. They didn't care what anyone said. They weren't going back down there, not into that specific tunnel, not after what happened. Management could argue. Other workers could laugh. But those three men had felt the cold, heard the voice, seen the figure, and witnessed him vanish. Whatever that was, they weren't going to put themselves in front of it again. The story didn't end there either, which is another reason it stuck around in that workplace. My uncle said other colleagues had their own experiences later. Not all of them, but enough. People started saying they'd seen the same bloke, the one in the old uniform with the old lamp. And the strange part was that the line never changed. He always said he was cold, always. Sometimes it was, "I'm so cold." Sometimes it was, "Can you help me? I'm so cold." But it was always the cold. Always the same plea, the same repeating words, like he was trapped in that moment and couldn't move on from it. Hearing that made my uncle feel worse, not better, because it meant it wasn't a one-time hallucination or a weird coincidence. It meant other people had seen him too, and it meant the tunnel had a story written into it that the living workers were only brushing up against by accident. My uncle eventually retired years later after a long working life. He doesn't talk about the tunnel story all the time. He doesn't bring it up at parties or use it to impress people, but he admitted to me that he thinks of that bloke from time to time, usually when he's alone, usually at night when the house is quiet and his mind wanders. He said he sometimes wonders who he was, what happened to him, why he was in that tunnel, why he was still there, repeating the same words like a broken record. And the saddest part of the story to me is that it didn't feel like a haunting meant to scare people. It felt like someone stuck, someone cold, someone still asking for help. That's what makes it linger. Not just the fear of seeing something impossible, but the feeling that, for a few seconds, my uncle stood face to face with something that didn't belong in the living world. And it wasn't angry. It wasn't trying to attack. It was just saying the same thing over and over again, like it had been saying it for a long time, waiting in the dark for someone to answer. Even now, when my uncle talks about it, he doesn't sound dramatic. He sounds unsettled in a quiet way, like a man who has accepted that there are some things he can't explain. He said that cold in the air was the most unnatural part, because it wasn't just temperature. It was like the tunnel itself turned into a place where warmth couldn't exist for a moment, like the presence of that bloke brought winter with him. And every time I think about the line, "I'm so cold," I imagine how it must have sounded down there, echoing against the walls, a bouncing back and forth in the dark, wrapping around them until it felt like the tunnel was speaking too. I worked nights in a nursing home for years, long enough to learn every creak in the building and every little habit people had when the lights were low and the halls were quiet. Night shift has its own rhythm. Everything slows down. Voices drop. Even the air feels different, like the whole place is holding its breath. Most people who work those hours get used to the silence, but they also start filling it with stories. Over time, I heard all of them. Staff would complain about the top floor the most, always the top floor, like it had been picked out by the building itself as the place where weird things happened. They talked about footsteps when nobody was there, doors that sounded like they opened by themselves, strange shuffling noises, and sometimes the soft crackle of plastic, like someone rummaging through a bag. They'd say it with that half-joking tone, but their eyes would always look a little too serious for it to be a joke. I never believed any of it. I'm not saying I thought they were lying. I just thought it was the kind of thing that happens when people are tired and working in a place that's already heavy with emotion. A nursing home at night is full of sounds. The building settles, pipes knock, wheelchairs squeak if you move them. A resident might call out in their sleep. Someone might wander, confused, and not remember where they are. When you're half awake at 3 in the morning, any little noise can sound bigger than it is. That was how I explained it. And because I had that mindset, I became the person who always volunteered to go upstairs. If someone said, "I don't want to do the top floor checks," I'd shrug and go. If someone got nervous about walking the long corridor alone, I'd tell them not to overthink it. I'd done night checks on both floors for 2 years, often by myself, and nothing had ever happened to me. No shadows, no voices, no strange figures, just quiet hallways, dim lights, and the normal work of caring for people who needed help through the night. I almost felt proud of being the unbothered one, the practical one, the one who didn't let ghost stories get into my head. That's why what happened that night hit me so hard. It wasn't just scary. It felt like it came straight for the one person who didn't believe in any of it, like the building waited until I was relaxed enough to drop my guard. It was a normal shift at first. We were on the top floor, and I was in one of the resident rooms with a colleague. The top floor always felt slightly different than the rest of the building. Not in a dramatic way, but in the small details. The hallway was longer. The lights seemed a bit weaker, like they didn't fully reach the corners. The air was a touch cooler. You could hear the hum of fluorescent bulbs and the faint, distant sounds of the lower floors, but mostly it was quiet in a way that made your footsteps sound too loud. That kind of quiet. We were changing a resident, doing the usual care tasks. It wasn't rushed, but it wasn't slow either. We had done it 100 times. The resident was in bed, the room dim, the little night lamp throwing a soft light on the walls. The corridor outside was even darker, just a strip of light from the overhead fixtures. Everything felt routine until my colleague paused and tilted his head slightly, like he was listening to something. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I didn't stop what I was doing right away. I honestly thought he meant the resident, or maybe someone down the hall. "Hear what?" I said, still focused on the task. "It sounds like someone walking," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but there was a tension in it, that careful tone people use when they don't want to admit they're uneasy. I listened for a moment. I heard nothing I would call footsteps. I heard the hum, and maybe a faint sound that could have been the building settling, but that was it. "It's probably someone on the other side," I said, "or the floor creaking. This place is old." He didn't look convinced. He kept glancing toward the door, like he expected someone to pass by any second. I remember feeling mildly irritated, not at him exactly, but at the way these stories always came back. I wanted to do the work, finish our tasks, and move on. I didn't want the shift to turn into another top floor is haunted conversation. We were nearly done when I realized we needed more bed sheets. The supply in the room wasn't enough for what we had planned, and the resident needed fresh linens. The cupboard where we kept extra sheets was at the end of the corridor, a walk down the hall away from the room. I'd done that walk countless times. It was automatic to me. Go out, turn, walk to the end, open the cupboard, grab what you need, walk back. "I'll get them," I said, like it was nothing. My colleague looked at me with relief mixed with worry, as if he was glad I was going but also didn't want to admit why. "Okay," he said, and he stayed with the resident. I stepped out into the corridor. The room behind me felt warm compared to the hallway. The corridor stretched out, empty and quiet. The lights above were on, but the ends of the hall still felt shadowed, like the brightness faded before it got there. I started walking toward the cupboard. My shoes made soft sounds against the floor. I could hear my own movement, and that was it. Halfway down, I noticed the quiet felt even thicker than usual. Sometimes there's a background noise in places like that, even at night. A distant TV in someone's room, a call bell, a staff member moving a cart. That night, it felt like everything had stopped at once, like the building decided to go still. I reached the cupboard without anything happening. I opened it. The door made a small sound, that soft squeak of a hinge that hasn't been oiled enough. Inside were stacks of folded sheets and some plastic-wrapped packages of supplies. I grabbed a bundle of bed sheets, the fabric cool and clean against my hands, and I turned back toward the room. That's when I started hearing it. At first it was so faint I almost ignored it. A soft, steady sound, like steps somewhere down the hall. Not right beside me, but close enough that it felt like it was on the same floor, moving with purpose. I paused, bed sheets in my arms, and listened. The sound continued. Slow, heavy footsteps, not rushed, not light. It sounded like a person wearing solid shoes, not slippers. I rolled my eyes at myself and started walking, still annoyed more than scared. In my head, I was already forming explanations. Maybe my colleague had walked out and was now coming toward me. Maybe another staff member was doing a check. Maybe someone was pulling a cart. Maybe it was the building. But as I took a few steps, another sound joined the footsteps. A distinct rustling, like plastic bags being touched, opened, moved around. That crisp crinkle you hear when someone digs into a trash bag or opens a package. It was close enough that I could hear the details of it, not just a faint noise, which made my irritation sharpen. Because who was messing with plastic bags at that hour? And why in the hallway? I kept walking, my grip tightening on the sheets. The footsteps were still there, steady. The plastic sound continued in short bursts, like someone reaching into something, then pulling their hand out, then reaching in again. It made me think of the supply area, like someone was digging through packages. Maybe someone had taken a bag of supplies out and was checking it. But why would they do that in the hallway instead of a room? I was halfway back to the resident room now, and I could feel that strange sense of being watched starting to creep up my spine. Not because I believed in anything supernatural, but because the sounds didn't line up with what I could see. The corridor looked empty. No one was ahead of me. No one was behind me. Just the long hallway and the doors to resident rooms, most of them dark and closed. The footsteps got louder. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't like the footsteps were moving away or coming from far off. They sounded like they were right there, but still I couldn't see anyone. And the plastic crinkling sounded like it was right beside those footsteps, like whoever was walking was also handling a bag. I stopped in the middle of the hall and turned my head toward the direction of the noise, ready to snap at someone for being careless or making a mess. I called out, not loud, but enough to carry. No answer. The sound didn't stop. That's when my annoyance started turning into something else. Not full fear yet, but that uneasy feeling you get when your brain keeps trying to match a sound to an image and it can't. I took another step, then another, and the footsteps seemed to match me like they were keeping pace in a way that made no sense. The plastic crinkled again, a sharp, clear sound, and suddenly I felt my whole body tense, like my nerves were reacting before my mind fully understood why. I looked toward the resident room door. It was a few steps away now. I could see the light from inside spilling out into the hallway. My colleague was still inside. I wanted to get back in there, finish what we were doing, and move on. But right before I reached the door, something moved in the corridor. It wasn't a small flicker. It wasn't a trick of light. It was a shadow passing across the hallway like a person walking by. I saw it clearly. The shadow was big, too big. not a small, thin shape you could dismiss as a coat hanging on a door or a reflection from a light. It moved like a person moving, with the solid shape of shoulders and height. And it crossed the corridor with a confidence that made it feel real, like someone had just walked past, close enough that if I stepped out, I'd bump into them. My first thought was still rational. Someone walked by, that's all. Someone walked by, and I just didn't see them because the angle was weird. But the next thought slammed into me immediately after. If someone walked by, where were they? There was nowhere for them to go that fast. The corridor was straight. There were doors, yes, but they were closed, and I didn't hear any door open. And the shadow was so large, it would have been attached to a person large enough to notice. At the exact moment the shadow passed, the footsteps sounded right there, heavy and close, and the plastic crinkling happened again, like the sound was following the shadow itself. Everything inside me flipped. It was like my brain stopped offering explanations and just went straight to alarm. My heart jumped so hard it felt like it hit my throat. My hands went cold around the bedsheets. I froze so completely that for a second I couldn't even blink properly. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the space where the shadow had been, and my body felt locked in place, like the floor had grabbed my shoes. The corridor looked empty. No one was there. But the feeling that someone had just passed by did not go away. It felt like the air had been disturbed, like something had moved through it and left a pressure behind. I could hear my own breathing suddenly, loud in my ears. The resident room door was right there, open, light spilling out, safety just a step away, and still I couldn't move. I wanted to run into the room. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to tell myself I was tired and imagining it, but I couldn't make my legs work. I don't even know how long I stood there, but it felt like forever. It was probably only a few seconds, long enough for my mind to race through every possible explanation and reject all of them because none of them fit what I had just seen and heard. Long enough for the fear to settle into my chest like a weight. My colleague called my name from inside the room. "You okay?" he asked, because I guess he noticed I was taking too long. That snapped me just enough to move. I stumbled into the room, still clutching the bed sheets, and I must have looked awful because my colleague's face changed immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked. I tried to speak, but my voice came out thin. I saw something," I said, and even saying it made me feel ridiculous because I was the one who didn't believe. I was the one who always told everyone to stop talking like that. My colleague's eyes widened, like he'd been waiting for this moment for months. "What did you see?" he asked, and his voice dropped lower. I glanced back at the open doorway, half expecting the shadow to pass again, half expecting someone to suddenly appear and prove it was all normal. But the hallway stayed empty. The noises stopped once I was inside, or maybe I just couldn't hear them over my own heartbeat. There was a shadow, I said, big, like a person, and I heard footsteps and plastic bags, like someone messing with them. My colleague didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off. He just looked at me with that expression people get when the thing they fear has been confirmed. "I told you," he whispered, like he didn't want to say it too loud in case whatever was out there could hear. That made the fear spike again, sharp and hot. Because if he believed it, and he'd heard it too, then I couldn't just tell myself it was my imagination. I didn't want to go back out there. The idea of stepping into that hallway again made my stomach turn. I stood close to the resident's bed, as if the small, warm room could protect me from whatever was in the corridor. I kept looking at the doorway. My hands were shaking slightly, and I tried to hide it by adjusting the sheets. I managed to say, "Call someone, please." My colleague hesitated, as if he didn't want to admit he needed help either. But he could see I wasn't okay. He picked up his phone or the internal call system and contacted another colleague, asking them to come upstairs. While we waited, I stayed inside that room like it was a shelter. I couldn't make myself step into the hallway again, not even to close the door fully, because the thought of standing in Thratch's threshold made my skin crawl. When the other colleague arrived, the sound of their footsteps in the corridor made me jump, which was humiliating. I was used to that sound. It should have been normal, but now every step in that hallway felt like it could be something else. They came into the room, saw my face, and immediately asked what happened. I explained it again, still struggling to believe my own words. I could hear how it sounded. Like a ghost story. Like something people say to scare each other on night shift. And yet the fear in my body was real. My legs still felt weak. My heart still hammered in my chest. The colleague tried to be calm. They glanced out into the corridor and said they didn't see anyone. They walked a few steps out and looked down the hallway toward the cupboard. Nothing. Quiet. Normal. But that didn't help me, because whatever I'd seen wasn't standing there waiting to be caught. It had passed by like it had somewhere to go, like it didn't care whether I saw it or not. We finished the residence care with all three of us there. I kept my back to the wall whenever I could. I kept listening for the plastic crinkle, the heavy steps. They didn't come back while we were together, which somehow made it worse, because it felt like it only happened when I was alone. After we left that room, I refused to walk the corridor by myself. I stayed close to the others, even though that wasn't my usual style. The whole time, my mind kept replaying the shadow, the size of it, the way it moved, the way the footsteps and the plastic sound lined up with it perfectly. I kept asking myself if there was any way the light could have made a shadow that large, if someone could have been hidden by the angle, if I had somehow hallucinated it. But I couldn't make it disappear from my memory. The worst part was the change it caused in me afterward. Before that night, I was the brave one, the practical one, the one who didn't get caught up in fear. For 2 years, I had walked those hallways alone, top floor and bottom floor, without any problem. I had done checks at the quietest hours, opened doors, walked past dark rooms, and never once felt scared. I honestly thought the stories were just stories. After that night, I couldn't do it anymore. Something broke in my confidence, like a switch flipped that I couldn't flip back. I stopped going upstairs alone. If someone asked me to do the top floor check by myself, I found an excuse. If I had to walk the corridor, I waited until someone came with me. I started paying attention to every sound, every creak, every rustle. The building didn't feel like just a workplace anymore. It felt like something that could surprise me again when I wasn't expecting it. Even on nights when nothing happened, I still felt tense. I'd catch myself staring down the hallway longer than I needed to, listening for footsteps that might not be there. I'd feel my heart speed up when I heard plastic crinkle, even if it was just a bag in a trash bin settling. I'd feel a spike of fear when a shadow moved, even if it was a staff member passing by. And I hated that. I hated that I had become the person who was scared. I hated that I couldn't just brush it off the way I used to. But no matter how much I tried to talk myself out of it, I couldn't forget the moment in that corridor when I saw that large shadow pass and heard those heavy steps and that unmistakable plastic sound all happening together, like it was one thing moving through the hall. It changed the way I felt about that top floor forever. Because it wasn't like hearing a strange noise once and then laughing about it later. It was the certainty of what I saw in that split second, the way my body reacted without permission. The way I froze like a child, even though I'm an adult who has handled far worse things in real life. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it in a way that makes sense. I only know what happened, and I know that for 2 years before that, nothing had ever happened to me, and I never believed any of it. Then, one night, in that quiet corridor, carrying bed sheets back to a resident room, I saw something that made me call for help because I was too scared to step out of that room alone. And after that, I was never the same on night shift again.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.